My brothers and sisters, there are moments in life that feel like a glitch in the system, as if you've walked into the wrong room of history. This story begins with one of those moments. It was a weekday afternoon, the kind where the city moves slowly, like it's catching its breath between storms. I had been invited to a meeting, one of those vague sit-downs that appear on your calendar without an explanation, as if someone else decided you should be there. The room was polished. Too polished. The kind of room where the walls are white, the chairs are expensive, and the silence feels imported. And that's where I met him, the man who, in ways I had not yet understood, ran the city. Not the mayor. Not the council speaker. Not a commissioner or a director or a public servant whose life is woven into our streets. No, this man was different. He was quiet the way powerful men are quiet, confident in a way that suggested the world rarely told him no. His handshake was firm, but not warm. His eyes scanned the room like someone measuring the dimensions of a future purchase. We exchanged pleasantries, the kind that taste like cardboard and obligation. But as the conversation unfolded, I felt something, an unease, like a rattle beneath the floorboards. And then it happened. A casual sentence, a passing mention, one of those simple phrases that shouldn't carry the weight of revelation, but somehow do. "Oh, I don't live in the city," he said. Just like that. The kind of truth dropped with the nonchalance of someone telling you they don't drink coffee. He said it calmly, without embarrassment, without hesitation. He didn't live here. He didn't belong to the streets we walk, the trains we depend on, the air we breathe, the consequences we endure. And yet, this man shaped the city as if it were a blueprint on his desk. That moment, the absurdity, the dissonance, the quiet arrogance of it was the spark. A spark that grew into a question, and then a fire. How did someone who doesn't live here come to run the place we call home? This is where our story begins, with a truth so simple, it almost feels unreal. My brothers and sisters, once you hear something that shakes the ground beneath your feet, you start looking differently at the world around you. That's what his sentence did to me. It peeled back a layer of the city, revealing a hidden architecture most of us feel but never see. You and I grew up being told a simple story, that power is held by the people we elect, that the destiny of our neighborhoods is shaped by ballots and town halls and public hearings, that the city is governed by those who live among us. But the real truth, the one we whisper to each other when the rent spikes, when the bus line disappears, when the precinct gets a new toy while the school loses a counselor, the real truth is that power often moves through quieter corridors, boards you've never heard of, consultants who never introduce themselves, agencies that operate behind tinted glass, private interests who see a city not as a living, breathing community, but as an asset class. These are the caretakers of invisible power. And the man I met was one of them. Not a villain with a cape, not a shadowy puppeteer perched atop the skyline. No, something much simpler and therefore more dangerous. He was a professional decision maker, a man hired to shape the city without being shaped by it. He didn't worry about the price of groceries rising faster than wages. He didn't ride the aging trains or listen to the hum of frustration in the late-night platforms. He didn't watch the sunset from a building that might be demolished next year because a developer wants a better use. He didn't know the sound of children playing in a courtyard that a spreadsheet might one day reclassify as underutilized. He lived somewhere else. And yet his decisions lived here. You see, power without proximity is one of the most dangerous forces in society. When someone controls your reality but doesn't share your reality, something human breaks in the process. Empathy dissolves. Responsibility becomes theoretical. The consequences of decisions lose their weight. In the weeks after that meeting, I began to understand. He wasn't an exception. He was a symbol of a system where the people who hold the levers aren't the ones who feel the outcomes. This is the invisible architecture of power, silent, distant, and deeply woven into our daily lives. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. There is a moment in every struggle for justice when you realize that the people making the decisions aren't living in the same story as you. They may walk the same streets occasionally, glance at the same skyline, pass through the same train stations, but they aren't in the story. They're just visiting it. That's when the distance becomes unmistakable, because the city they see is not the city we live in. The city they see is a collection of maps, boundaries, districts, zones, density charts, and profit projections. Everything labeled, everything categorized, everything sanitized. They look at a neighborhood and see emerging potential. We look at that same neighborhood and see the aunties who sit on milk crates outside the corner store, The kids playing tag between parked cars. The bodega cat who somehow belongs to all of us. They see parcels. We see people. They see inefficiencies. We see histories. They see obstacles. We see home. When someone does not live among us, they can easily confuse life for data. They mistake the sound of a community for background noise. They see struggle only in the abstract, something to be quantified, not felt. And yet their decisions reshape our lives, like the wind reshapes a coastline. A single planning meeting in a sterile room can translate to a beloved bakery closing after 32 years. A strategic reallocation of transit resources means someone's grandmother now waits twice as long for a bus that is half as reliable. A high-value redevelopment opportunity means a family must pack up their memories into cardboard boxes and leave behind a place that held their childhood. When you don't live in the city you govern, you don't hear the "where are we supposed to go" whispers shared between neighbors. You don't feel the heaviness that settles on a block after the third rent hike in a year. You don't sense the quiet grief of watching your world shrink so someone else's balance sheet can grow. You don't feel what we feel. And that difference, that gap between spreadsheet and street, is where injustice grows. It's not always malicious. Sometimes it's ignorance. Sometimes it's apathy. Sometimes it's simply convenience. But regardless of the cause, the effect is the same. A city run by people who are not accountable to the consequences of their choices. This is what happens when proximity is replaced by power. When decisions are made from outside the very world they will reshape. And it raises a quiet, devastating question. If the city they govern exists only on their screens, then who is the city truly for? My brothers and sisters, systems of power are rarely born in one dramatic moment. They aren't announced with fanfare or accompanied by a single defining decision. More often, they grow quietly, like vines creeping up the side of an old building. Not dangerous at first, almost invisible, until one day you look up and realize the vines aren't decoration anymore. They're structure. That is how we handed over the keys to people who do not live here. Slowly, subtly, quietly. It started with little things. A commission created to make efficient decisions. A board assembled to oversee development. An advisory group staffed by experts. And we didn't question it because who doesn't want expertise? Who doesn't want efficiency? Who doesn't want progress? But expertise without accountability becomes detachment. Efficiency without empathy becomes harm. Progress without community becomes displacement. And so, bit by bit, we created layers of decision-making so complex, so distant from everyday people, that ordinary residents no longer knew who to hold responsible for their suffering. The housing office blames the zoning board. The zoning board blames the planning commission. The planning commission blames the consultant. The consultant blames the data. The data blames no one. And in that fog of responsibility, something dangerous happened. People who didn't live here gained more control than the people who did. Some were lobbyists. Some were investors. Some were policy technicians or advisors or consultants, flown in for a few hours at a time, dropping into our city like an airport layover. They came with credentials. They came with plans. But they didn't come with us in their hearts. And we allowed it. Not deliberately, not maliciously, but gradually. Because we were told this was how a modern city should run. Because we were busy surviving while others were busy strategizing. Because the system was built to be opaque, and opacity always serves power. We didn't lose our city in one moment. We lost it in the quiet accumulation of decisions made by those who never felt the weight of those decisions. But here is the truth we must hold on to. If we handed over the keys piece by piece, we can take them back the same way. Piece by piece, voice by voice, action by action. Because the city belongs not to the people who oversee it from afar, but to the people who live, breathe, struggle, and dream within it. My brothers and sisters, every city tells two stories. One written in boardrooms, and the other written on bus stops, sidewalks, and kitchen tables. And the cruel truth is this: when power chooses distance, the people who stay, who live, who endure, become the ones who pay the price. Let me take you into that second story. Not in statistics, not in reports, but in people. There's a woman I met on the steps of her building in Queens. Let's call her Amina. She was sitting outside with two grocery bags, one filled with food, the other with letters she didn't want to open. Rent increases, lease changes, notices written in a language that didn't carry her memories. She told me, "They don't see us." Not angrily, not with bitterness, but with the quiet resignation of someone who has learned that being unseen is a kind of violence. A planning decision far from her block had reclassified her building. Just paperwork, nothing dramatic. But paperwork is powerful, because suddenly her home was not a home, it was a redevelopment opportunity. Her life, her memories, her dignity were reduced to a line item. She asked me a question I will never forget. Why do people who don't live here get to decide if my home stays or goes? I didn't have an answer that would make her whole. Then there was Ernesto, a bus driver who has lived in the same neighborhood for 27 years. His route was cut not because ridership dropped, but because a consultant said reallocating resources would be more efficient. He now leaves home an hour earlier just to begin his day. His children see him less. His rest is shorter. His back pain is constant. It's like the city thinks we're pieces on a board, he told me. But pieces don't have stories. And then there's the block in the Bronx that lost its community center. A decision made downtown with the justification of budget realignment. They closed the only place where kids felt safe after school. Parents grieved not because the building was gone, but because the world seemed to care more about balance sheets than about their children. These are not tragedies born from malice. They are tragedies born from distance. Because when you don't live here, you don't hear Amina's trembling voice. You don't see Ernesto rubbing his shoulders after a 14-hour shift. You don't witness the fear on a mother's face when the sun sets earlier and her child has nowhere safe to go. When power is distant, community pays the cost. Always. And yet, inside every painful story, there is a deeper truth. Our communities still endure, still rise, still hold each other up. But endurance should not be the price of someone else's convenience, and suffering should never be mistaken for silence. We must name this boldly and without hesitation. A city governed from afar is a city harmed from within. Weeks after that unsettling meeting, something in me refused to let his comment fade. I kept replaying it, that calm, casual admission that he didn't live in the place he helped shape. So one day, I asked him, not confrontationally, not theatrically, just honestly, why don't you live in the city you help run? He paused not in the way people pause when they're searching for a lie, but in the way people pause when they think the truth might be good enough. He said, well, it's complicated. I like more space, less noise, better schools, and it's just easier to do my work from where I am. More space, less noise, better schools, easier work. Every word felt like a window into a worldview I had struggled to understand. He didn't say he disliked the city. He didn't say he distrusted it. He simply didn't want to live with the consequences of his own decisions. He wanted to shape our world without being shaped by it. I looked at him and realized there was no hatred in his voice, no contempt, no explicit disregard for the people of this city. There was something more dangerous. Indifference, dressed up as logic. He didn't see why living here should matter, because to him, the city was a job, not a home, a project, not a community, a system, not a beating heart. He didn't understand that noise is life. That space is not just square footage, it's belonging. That schools are not measured only in scores, but in safety, joy, and possibility. That ease is never the measure of justice. And I realized something profound in that moment. You cannot convince someone to care about a place they have chosen not to belong to. Caring is born from proximity. Belonging is born from shared fate. And leadership, true leadership, requires both. When a person with power chooses distance, they don't just leave the city physically, they leave it morally. And a city deserves better than leaders who want the authority, but not the responsibility. My brothers and sisters, every city holds two versions of itself. The one we are living in right now, and the one we know, deep in our bones, is possible. After that conversation with him, after hearing his reasons, his distance, his logic, I walked home with a heaviness I couldn't shake, because it made me realize something we rarely say out loud. We have become so accustomed to surviving the city we've been given that we have forgotten the power of imagining the city we deserve. A city where decisions aren't made from boardrooms, but from conversations on stoops. A city where the people shaping its future walk the same sidewalks, breathe the same air, wait at the same bus stops. A city where leadership is inseparable from community. A city where expertise serves humanity, not the other way around. Imagine a city where housing is not a chessboard of investments, but the foundation of dignity. Imagine a city where public spaces feel like invitations, not afterthoughts. Where the hum of the subway is not a symbol of neglect, but a testament to collective pride, where every child, no matter their zip code, walks into a school that feels like a promise kept. Imagine leaders who know the names of the local shop owners, not because it's good politics, but because they buy their coffee there every morning. Imagine officials who understand the fear of walking home late at night, not because they read a report, but because they, too, step into the same darkness after a long day. This imagined city isn't a fantasy. It is a mirror reflecting what we could be if those with power chose belonging instead of distance. But right now, we are living in the tension between these two cities. The one we dream of, led by people who care, and the one we endure, shaped by people who don't live its consequences. And that tension, that painful contrast, is not just frustration. It is fuel. It is the quiet beginning of transformation. Because the moment we recognize the gap between what is and what could be, we begin to understand that our hope is not naive. It is necessary. There is a belief whispered in policy circles, repeated in the corridors of power, and spoken with the calm certainty of people unbothered by the consequences of their own decisions. Where I live shouldn't matter. I can serve the city just as well from afar. But that is not how human beings work, and it is not how justice works. Distance is not neutral. Distance shapes what we notice, what we value, what we fear, and what we ignore. When you live in a place, you inherit its humanity. You carry its struggles with you. You navigate its imperfections. You see its crises in real time, not in PDFs. You hear its urgency not through stakeholder feedback, but through the voice of a neighbor knocking on your door because their heat went out. Living somewhere is not just geography, it is accountability. When leaders live outside the city, they don't feel the tension in their chest when the rent is due. They don't hear the sirens at 2 a.m. and wonder what tragedy unfolded. They don't sense the joy of a block party or the grief of a closed school. They don't witness the way the city breathes faster during storms, slower during sunsets, and without that emotional proximity, something essential erodes. Not competence, not intelligence, but compassion. Because compassion comes from exposure, from seeing the world as it is, not as numbers on a page. Distance allows suffering to become theoretical. Distance allows injustice to become administrative. Distance allows harm to become acceptable. But proximity creates responsibility. Proximity creates humility. Proximity creates truth. When you live in a city, you are bound to it by the simple, sacred thread of shared fate. Your children's future depends on the same school system. Your safety depends on the same streets. Your joy depends on the same spaces. Your dignity depends on the same policies. Leadership without proximity is not leadership. It is management. And our communities deserve leaders who do more than manage. They deserve leaders who belong. Because the truth is simple, and it is moral. If you are going to shape a city's destiny, you should share a city's life. My brothers and sisters, whenever we talk about power, there is a temptation to imagine it as something distant, unreachable, locked away in marble buildings or hidden behind closed doors. But that is the illusion. The truth is far simpler, far more human. Power lives wherever people decide they matter. And when people realize that the city belongs to them, not to consultants, not to private interests, not to those who rule from the comfort of distance, everything begins to shift. Reclaiming a city does not start with elections alone. It does not start with rallies alone. It does not start with dramatic confrontations or sweeping reforms. It starts with small, stubborn acts of presence. A tenant association deciding that silence is no longer acceptable. A group of neighbors showing up to a zoning meeting that was never meant for them. Parents demanding representation on a school board that has forgotten their children's names. Young people organizing to defend a community center that officials see only as a budget line. Real power is built in living rooms and community centers, whispered in late-night conversations between friends who are tired of watching their block change without their consent. It rises in meetings where residents sit across from decision-makers and say, "We are not here to be managed. We are here to be respected." And little by little, that power begins to reshape the architecture of the city. Not the physical architecture, but the moral one. We start demanding transparency. Who made this decision? Why were we not consulted? Who benefits? Who pays the price? We start insisting on representation. If you're going to govern this city, you must live in it. If you're going to shape our neighborhoods, you must walk through them. If you're going to impact our children's futures, your children should share their classrooms. We start building coalitions not just of activists or advocates, but of ordinary people who have discovered the extraordinary truth that they deserve a say. And that is where transformation begins. Not with those who hold the titles, but with those who hold the courage. Not with those who manage the city from afar, but with those who love it from within. Not with those who treat the city as a project, but with those who treat it as home. Real power is not distance. Real power is presence. And when people reclaim that presence, the city begins to return to them. Piece by piece, voice by voice, door by door. My brothers and sisters, every city carries a heartbeat. Sometimes it's loud echoing through festivals, parades, laughter spilling out from open windows. Sometimes it's quiet felt in the soft hum of streetlights, the early morning footsteps of essential workers, the first train rolling into a station before sunrise. But the heartbeat is always there, and it belongs to the people who live here. When I met the man who runs the city without living in it, I didn't walk away angry. I walked away clear about what the city is missing, clear about what leadership must look like, clear about the difference between authority and responsibility. Because what makes a city worth living in is not the skyline, not the restaurants, not the parks or the culture or the reputation, but the simple, sacred truth that we are all in it together. A city worth coming home to is a city where leaders live among the people they serve, where policies are shaped not in isolation, but in conversation, where decisions are rooted not in detachment, but in shared fate. A city worth coming home to is one where struggle is not ignored and suffering is not unseen, where the most vulnerable are protected and the most powerful are held accountable. A city worth coming home to is one where every person, whether they've lived here for 5 generations or 5 days, feels the dignity of belonging. And that city is not an illusion. It is not a dream. It is not a distant future waiting for someone else to build it. It begins with us, with the choices we make, with the questions we ask, with the courage to demand leaders who do not hover above the city, but stand inside it. Because proximity is more than geography. It is commitment. It is empathy. It is love. And if we truly love this city, its people, its history, its imperfection, its possibility, then we must insist on leaders who love it too. Not from afar, not in theory, not on paper, but in practice, in presence, in shared destiny. My brothers and sisters, the city we deserve is within reach. All we must do is build it together, one act of courage at a time. And may our final promise be simple. We will create a city worth coming home to, because we will never again allow it to be governed by those who don't.